I never imagined that a simple birthday gift could change the course of my entire life. My daughter Caroline sent me a bottle of wine for my 68th birthday. It was wrapped in glossy paper, a deep burgundy bow tied around its neck. At first glance it looked elegant, thoughtful, something a loving child would do for her mother. But when she called the next day and asked, "So how was the wine?" and I replied, "Oh, I gave it to my old friend Martin. He loved it," there was a pause on the line. A heavy silence. Then her voice cracked through the receiver, sharp as broken glass. "You did what?" That was the moment I realized. This was no ordinary gift. Before I continue, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and, where are you watching from today? And as you listen, let me know in the comments how this story makes you feel or if you've ever experienced something similar. Your thoughts mean a lot to me and I'd love to hear your perspective. My name is Judith. I'm 68 years old, a retired teacher and a widow. For most of my life I believed in hard work, honesty and family. I never cared for luxury or money. I cared about raising my daughter with values. Or at least I thought I had. Caroline grew up intelligent, ambitious and strong-willed. But somewhere along the way her ambition turned into entitlement. She began to see me not as her mother but as an obstacle. Every conversation circled back to money, inheritance, property. She would ask about the house, about my savings, about what's next for her future, while I was still alive. It hurt, but I told myself maybe she was just anxious, just preparing. I tried to ignore the sharp edges of her words, the dismissive way she spoke to me, the cold distance in her eyes whenever I refused to give her what she wanted. After my husband passed away, Caroline grew even bolder. She assumed everything we had built was hers by right. My home, my pension, even my small jewelry collection. She spoke about them as if they were already in her hands. Still, she was my only child. And I was her mother. I forgave more than I should have. That morning, on my birthday, I was alone in my kitchen when the delivery arrived. A sleek black box with gold lettering. Inside, nestled in straw-like paper, was a bottle of deep red wine. The label was foreign, something imported, expensive-looking. My first thought was surprise. Caroline never bought me thoughtful gifts, let alone something costly. But here's the truth, I couldn't drink it. What Caroline didn't know was that I had recently started taking heart medication, and my doctor had strictly forbidden alcohol. Even one glass could cause complications. She hadn't been around enough to notice. To her, I was still the mother who once enjoyed a glass of red at the holidays. So why send this now? I stared at the bottle for a long while. The sun caught the glass, making the red glow almost sinister. I felt uneasy, though I couldn't quite explain why. Later that afternoon Martin came over. He has been my neighbor for 30 years, a kind man in his 70s who lost his wife a decade ago. We often shared tea, books, and conversation. He loved wine. So I told him about the gift and handed him the bottle. His eyes lit up. "Judith, this looks exquisite. Are you sure you don't want to keep it?" I smiled. "What would I do with it? You'll enjoy it far more than I ever could." He laughed, thanked me, and left with the bottle. For me it was a small act of kindness. For him a pleasant surprise. I thought nothing more of it. The next evening my phone rang. Caroline's voice came through, sugar-coated at first. "Happy birthday again, Mom. Did you try the wine?" I answered truthfully. "Oh, I gave it to Martin, my neighbor. He loves wine." There was silence. Long enough that I thought the line had gone dead. Then suddenly her voice rose, sharp, panicked. "You what?" I blinked, confused. "I gave it to Martin. He was delighted." "Why? Was it very expensive?" Her breathing changed. I could hear it through the phone, rapid, shallow. Then she snapped, "You don't understand what you've done." Before I could ask another word, she hung up. I sat there in my living room holding the phone, my heart pounding against my ribs. I didn't know why she reacted that way. All I knew was this: something was very, very wrong. And within 24 hours I would discover just how wrong. Martin invited me over the following evening. He was eager to open the wine, to share it with me even though I told him I couldn't drink. "You can at least smell it, Judith," he chuckled. "Tell me what you think of the aroma." His living room smelled faintly of cedar and old books. He poured the wine into 2 glasses, though he pushed only one toward himself. The deep red shimmered in the lamplight. He lifted the glass, inhaled, smiled. "Smooth. Rich. This is quality." I watched, my hands folded tightly in my lap as he took the first sip. He savored it, closed his eyes and sighed contentedly. For a moment I felt relieved. At least someone was enjoying Caroline's gift. Maybe I had been overthinking. But within minutes Martin's hand began to tremble. The glass rattled against the table as he set it down. His face drained of color. "Judith," he whispered, clutching his chest. Panic shot through me. "Martin? Are you all right?" He staggered, his breath ragged, and collapsed onto the carpet. I screamed for help. A neighbor rushed over, and soon the wail of ambulance sirens filled the night air. At the hospital I sat in the waiting room, my heart hammering. Hours passed before a doctor finally approached. His expression was grave. "Are you family?" he asked. "I'm his neighbor. But he's like family to me. Please tell me what's happening." The doctor sighed. "He's stable now, but it was close. We found traces of a toxic substance in his system. Something was in that wine." The room spun. My knees nearly gave out. Toxic substance. In the wine. Caroline's wine. When the police arrived to take a statement, I told them everything. The gift, the phone call, my daughter's strange reaction. They exchanged uneasy glances, jotting down notes. "Mrs. Clark," one officer said gently, "do you believe your daughter intended for you to drink that wine?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Because in that moment the truth slammed into me like a freight train. Yes. Caroline hadn't sent me a gift. She had sent me a weapon. The next morning Caroline showed up at the hospital, all crocodile tears and dramatic gasps. "Oh my God, Mom. What happened? Is Martin okay? This is terrible." She rushed to my side, squeezing my hands, her voice dripping with false concern. I looked into her eyes and saw it clearly, fear, not grief. She wasn't worried about Martin. She was worried about what he might reveal, or what the police might uncover. And in that sterile hospital corridor, with the smell of antiseptic heavy in the air, I made myself a silent promise. My daughter thought she was clever. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. Caroline swept into the hospital like a gust of cold wind, her heels clacking sharply against the linoleum. She carried a bouquet of lilies, far too extravagant for someone she barely knew. She placed them beside Martin's bed with a theatrical sigh, then turned to me with wide eyes. "Mom, this is unbelievable. How could something like this happen?" she asked, her voice dripping with rehearsed sorrow. I sat stiffly in the chair beside Martin, who lay pale and unconscious, an oxygen mask strapped across his face. His chest rose and fell with a fragile rhythm. The monitor beeped steadily, a reminder of just how close he had come to dying. Caroline reached for my hands. Her grip was warm but too tight, almost as if she wanted to control the way I responded. "Are you okay, Mom? You must be devastated." I studied her face, the practiced furrow of her brow, the dampness near the corners of her eyes that looked suspiciously like tears dabbed on with careful timing. To anyone else she might have seemed the picture of concern. But I knew her too well. "I'm fine," I said flatly, pulling my hands back. "It's Martin I'm worried about." She gave me a wounded look, as if my lack of gratitude had cut her deeply. "Of course, Martin. Poor man. He must have had a reaction to something. Something." She said it quickly, dismissively, as though the word itself were a threat she couldn't afford to linger on. That night after Caroline left, I couldn't sleep. I replayed her reaction on the phone, the way her voice had cracked when I told her the wine had gone to Martin. And now her exaggerated sorrow. It didn't add up. By morning I had resolved to keep my guard up. When I returned to the hospital the next day, I found Caroline already there. She was standing just outside Martin's room, speaking in hushed tones with her husband, Daniel. They didn't see me at first. I froze. Daniel's voice was low, tense. "You said she'd drink it. How could she just give it away?" Caroline hissed back. "How was I supposed to know she's on medication? She used to drink. This isn't my fault." My stomach turned to ice. Daniel muttered, "Now the old man knows. If he talks." Caroline cut him off sharply. "Then we'll make sure he doesn't." I stood there in the hallway, hidden just around the corner, my pulse thundering in my ears. Every word struck me like a knife. It was no accident. They had planned this. My daughter and her husband, the people who should have been my family, my safety, had tried to kill me. I pressed a hand to the wall to steady myself. For a brief moment, grief nearly crushed me. How had Caroline become this person? My little girl, once innocent, now capable of murder. But grief quickly gave way to something else. Cold, sharp determination. I walked into the hallway deliberately, letting my footsteps echo. Caroline flinched when she saw me, her face snapping into a mask of innocence. Daniel gave a quick, awkward smile. "Mom, you're here early," she said sweetly, her voice an octave too high. I looked at her for a long moment, silent, until her smile faltered. "Yes," I said at last. "I wouldn't miss a thing." The way her eyes darted nervously told me she understood more than my words. She knew that I knew. That night, as I sat alone at my kitchen table, I whispered to myself, "This ends now." For years I had allowed Caroline to belittle me, to treat me like a stepping stone toward her imagined fortune. I had forgiven the coldness, the arrogance, the constant greed. But this was something else. She had tried to erase me. And she thought she'd gotten away with it. But she was wrong. I sat across from the detective at the station, the smell of burnt coffee and old paper thick in the air. His pen scratched across the notepad as I repeated the story for the third time. The gift, the phone call, the hospital, the overheard conversation. Each time I told it, the words felt sharper, like glass cutting my tongue. "So, you believe your daughter and her husband intended for you to drink the wine?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "Yes, I do." He leaned back in his chair, studying me with careful eyes. "Mrs. Clark, these are serious accusations. Do you have any proof?" Proof. That cursed word. I clenched my hands together under the table. I had heard their whispers in the hospital hallway, but whispers weren't enough in court. Caroline was clever. She'd cry, she'd plead, she'd turn the narrative until I looked like a paranoid old woman. But I wasn't going to let that happen. That evening, back at home, I pulled out a dusty lockbox from the top of my closet. Inside were documents. My will, my husband's old insurance papers, deeds to the house. I spread them across the dining table, lit only by the weak glow of the lamp. For years, Caroline had circled these papers like a vulture, waiting for me to fall so she could swoop in. She thought of me as temporary, but the wealth is permanent. That night, I decided to change everything. The next morning, I met with my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, a gray-haired man who had known my late husband. He listened patiently as I explained. "I want to rewrite my will," I told him firmly. "Effective immediately. Nothing for Caroline. Nothing for Daniel." His brows rose slightly, but he didn't question it. Instead he asked, "And who will inherit, Mrs. Clark?" I thought of Martin lying pale in the hospital bed because of me. Because I had handed him that bottle. "Someone who has shown me kindness," I said at last. "Someone who deserves it." Meanwhile, Caroline's visits grew more frequent. She would appear at my door, carrying groceries I hadn't asked for, offering help I didn't need. Always with that too sweet smile. Always with eyes that flicked around the house like she was cataloging its worth. One afternoon, I caught her in my study, her fingers tracing the edge of the mahogany desk. She looked up, startled, then laughed nervously. "Just admiring, Mom. You know, this desk would look amazing in our new place." I said nothing. Just watched her. My silence unsettled her more than any words could. But her patience was running thin. One evening, I overheard her on the phone in the garden. He thought I was asleep. "No, not yet," she whispered harshly. "She's being cautious. But don't worry. We'll find another way. She can't live forever." Her voice carried just enough for me to hear. She didn't say my name. He didn't have to. The following week, the detective called me back to the station. "We've analyzed the bottle," he said. "There were traces of a toxic compound, slow-acting but lethal in the right dosage. Whoever put it there knew what they were doing." My blood ran cold. "And?" he sighed. "We can't pin it on anyone yet. The bottle was delivered by courier. No fingerprints except yours and the victim's. Without more, we can't move forward." I thanked him, but inside a storm was brewing. If the law couldn't give me justice, I would create my own. That night, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. For the first time in years, I didn't see a frail widow or a frightened mother. I saw a woman sharpening into steel. Caroline thought she was playing chess. But she didn't realize I had learned the game long before she was born. I whispered to the mirror, "If she wants a final move, I'll give her one." For weeks, I played the role of the fragile mother. I let Caroline think she still had the upper hand. I accepted her visits, nodded at her fake concern, and allowed her to believe I was slipping into dependence. All the while, behind closed doors, I was setting the stage. The detective had told me they needed proof. Something undeniable. Caroline was too smart to leave fingerprints or records. But she had one weakness: her arrogance. She thought I was too weak, too blind, too naive to notice what she was doing. An arrogance I knew was the perfect trap. It began with an invitation. "Caroline, why don't you come to dinner tomorrow?" I said one evening, my voice soft, almost hesitant. "Just you and me. I'll make your favorite stew. We can celebrate my health improving." Her eyes flickered with surprise, then calculation. She smiled sweetly. "Oh, Mom. That would be wonderful." I knew exactly what she heard: an opportunity. That night, after she left, I set my plan in motion. I contacted Detective Harris, the one assigned to Martin's case. "I can't give you fingerprints or paperwork," I told him, "but I can give you something better: a confession caught on camera. All I need is for you to be ready." He hesitated, then finally agreed. The next day, I placed 2 small cameras in the kitchen. One above the stove, hidden behind the spice rack, and one angled toward the table, disguised among the teapots. I tested them twice, making sure they recorded clearly. By evening, the table was set. Stew simmered on the stove. A bottle of wine, untouched, sat waiting, though this time it was purchased by me. Caroline arrived dressed impeccably as always. A soft cream blouse, gold earrings, the kind of outfit you'd wear not for dinner with your mother but for a victory lap. She embraced me, her perfume too heavy, her smile too wide. "Mom, this is so lovely," she cooed. I served her stew, poured her a glass of water, and sat across from her. We chatted lightly at first. Weather, neighborhood gossip, trivial things. Then, when she thought I wasn't looking, I saw her hand slip toward her purse. My stomach tightened. She pulled out a small vial no larger than a lipstick and glanced at me carefully. I rose, walking to the stove as if to stir the pot. I turned my back just enough to give her courage. And in that moment I heard the faintest sound: the clink of liquid being poured into my glass. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I let her think she had succeeded. When I returned, she pushed the glass toward me with a smile too serene to be genuine. "Mom, you should drink. You look so tired. It will help you relax." I stared at her, my hands folded on the table. For a long moment I let the silence stretch. Then I lifted the glass, holding it just inches from my lips. Her eyes gleamed. She thought victory was in her grasp. And then, bang! The door burst open. 2 officers strode in, Detective Harris behind them. Caroline's face went white. What is this?" she stammered, leaping to her feet. The detective held up a hand. "We saw everything. It's all on tape." Caroline's mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. She looked at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You," she whispered. "You set me up." I set the glass down carefully. My voice was steady, sharper than I'd ever heard it. "No, Caroline. You set yourself up. I just let you finish the game you started." She screamed as the officers handcuffed her, thrashing like a child denied a toy. Daniel, too, was brought in moments later, arrested on charges of conspiracy. For the first time in years, I felt something I had thought I'd lost forever: control. The courtroom was cold, the kind of chill that seeped into your bones no matter how tightly you wrapped your shawl around your shoulders. I sat in the front row, hands folded neatly in my lap, while Caroline shuffled in, wrists bound by steel cuffs. Her once perfect hair was limp, her tailored blouse wrinkled, her face pale and drawn. She scanned the room and spotted me. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Not remorse, not shame, but raw hatred. She blamed me, not herself. The trial moved quickly. The evidence was irrefutable. The toxicology report on the wine, the vial she had brought to my home, the footage of her hand tipping poison into my glass. The jury watched in silence as the video played. Caroline's polished mask cracked with every second that passed. When the footage ended, an audible murmur spread through the courtroom. Daniel's testimony came next. He tried to minimize his role, but his own words from the hospital hallway betrayed him. He was no innocent bystander. They had planned it together. The prosecutor's voice rang clear. Caroline Clark intended to murder her own mother. For greed. For inheritance. For nothing more than money. Each word was a hammer striking the coffin of her freedom. The defense attempted to spin it, of course. They painted Caroline as troubled, as a daughter, driven to desperation. They even tried to suggest I had misunderstood, that perhaps I had tricked her, that I had overreacted. But the jury saw through it. After only 3 hours of deliberation, the verdict came back: guilty. On all counts. Caroline stood trembling as the judge delivered her sentence. Caroline Clark, for attempted murder and conspiracy, you are hereby sentenced to 20 years in state prison. The gavel struck, final and absolute. I exhaled slowly, a weight I had carried for months lifting off my chest. Caroline's head snapped toward me, her voice breaking as she shouted, "You'll regret this, Mom. You'll die alone." I stood, smoothed my skirt and walked toward her. The guards tightened their grip as she strained against them. I leaned close enough that only she could hear me. "No, Caroline," I whispered. "For the first time in years, I'm finally living." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Questions flew. Why would your daughter do this? Do you feel vindicated? What happens now? I gave them only one answer. My daughter tried to take my life. Instead, she lost hers, her freedom, her future, her chance at redemption. And I will not waste another breath on her greed. Weeks later, I visited Martin at his rehabilitation center. He was recovering slowly, color returning to his cheeks, strength to his voice. When I told him the trial was over, that Caroline would never harm anyone again, he reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You saved us both, Judith," he said. I smiled faintly. "No, Martin. I just stopped pretending I was powerless." That night, back in my quiet home, I brewed myself a cup of tea. I stood by the window, watching the streetlights glow in the darkness. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like peace. I thought of Caroline, not the woman she had become, but the little girl she once was, running through the garden with ribbons in her hair. I mourned that child. But I didn't mourn the woman she had chosen to be. I had lost my daughter long before the trial. Maybe years ago, when greed started whispering louder than love in her heart. Maybe when she began looking at me not as her mother but as an obstacle. Somewhere along the line, I had hoped she would come back to me. The Caroline who once ran to me after nightmares. The Caroline who clutched my hand on the first day of school. The Caroline who said, "I love you, Mom," without calculation. But that Caroline was gone. I realized then that revenge hadn't been my victory. Survival was. Choosing myself, my life, my peace. That was the real triumph. Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't the bitter tears of defeat. They were cleansing. I had faced the darkest betrayal a mother could endure, and I was still standing. Stronger. Wiser. Unbroken. And now I'll turn the question to you, dear listener. What would you do if your own child betrayed you like this? Could you forgive, or would you fight back as I did? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because there are more stories of betrayal, justice, and revenge waiting for you.